Your stories heard. This is Undeterred. Live! Podcast streaming on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Stories heard. This is Undeterred. Undeterred by Ken.
Alright. So we are in the second to the last episode of this journal series. We are on episode 9 of our NSTP Journal Series, and for this episode, the topic is very important. It most likely have touched our lives once or twice, diba? Unfortunately, if that happened to you, I'm sorry, I apologize. But we will be talking about drug education. Okay, so sabi dito, the topic is be a drug prevention advocate. Do it the evidence-based way. Okay, so that's the topic, drug education. And for this episode's resource, the lecturer is Assistant Professor Frances Grace Duca Pante. She is the director of the ASEAN Center for Preventive Drug Education in UP Diliman. So, this episode will be revolving around 4 subtopics. And number 1 is about substance abuse prevention. Number 2, drug prevention updates, of course. And number 3, NSTP and drug prevention. And lastly, preventive drug education strategies. So, number 1, the number 1 question that we need to ask ourselves when we are talking about drug education is, do you believe in prevention? Okay, I'll let you think. Maybe you can pause this episode first, and then I will let you think. Do you believe in prevention? And for you, do you think it works? Diba? Data showed that drug use prevention is, number 1, effective, and number 2, it's cheap. What we need to do is to always keep in mind these 5 steps. Number 1, Prof. Frances Grace shared that we need to include family, the school, and the workplace in terms of addressing drug education and prevention. Of course, we as a close-knit community, as Filipinos, we are conservative, and we most likely don't want to talk about drug use, diba? In the workplace, within our families, and within the workplace, within the school. We consider this topic as taboo, and we have to change our mindset and how we treat this topic. Of course, yes, it is sensitive, diba? Pero kailangan natin kailangan natin i-open yung space within the family, within the school, and the workplace on how are we going to address this challenge, or this parang pagsubok, diba, sa buhay ng isang tao. Number 2, the message should be delivered positively, sabi niya, and focus on wellness. And we should stop yung scare tactics or fear mongering, diba? Yung fear arousal strategies. Ako kasi, for me, yung pag-deliver ng message about drug prevention, it needs to be positive kasi wala tang nakikitang ibang kasi negative na nga yung nangyari sa kanilang experience eh. It's they most likely have a negative experience to start with, them meaning people who use drugs or abuse drugs, diba? And if we're going to scare them, use negative advocacies, diba? Parang wino-worsen lang natin yung condition, diba? So, instead of delivering the message negatively, we need to focus on wellness, on their wellness. We need to let them imagine a world that is prosperous, that is kinder and generous to if you are clean, 'di ba? So yung mga nakikita rin natin na scare tactics, 'di ba? Yung fear mongering, 'di ba? Sa mga pub mats, 'di ba? Sa mga posters, advertisements, 'di ba? Advertisements, 'di ba? Nakikita natin na parang naputulan ng paa dahil smoke. Nakita natin na tinukhang dahil drug addict, ganyan. So those things parang nagpapalala lang siya, and hindi siya nakakatulong to improve 'di ba, yung perception ng mga taong affected ng substance abuse dito sa Philippines by doing that. And number three, 'di ba, yung interactive strategies. This should be used in delivering the prevention message. Yung what do you mean by interactive strategies? Different things like hindi lang yung visual, nakikita lang diyan or nagpa-skill lang diyan. No to drugs, 'di ba? Um, yung mga naka-plaster lang sa mga barangay, 'di ba? Parang those are not effective. We need to be creative and then for us to send the message across to those people who really needs them, 'di ba? We need to think of interactive strategies in delivering this message, which is prevention, which will go to number 4. Prevention services should be available once narinig na ng mga targeted audience natin yung prevention message natin. Yung prevention services should follow through. It should be available for them, meaning our healthcare needs to be universal, 'di ba? It needs to be selective to anong specific, anong level, anong phase na sila ng substance abuse, and it needs to be indicated. Sorry. And then number 5, we should acknowledge yung developmental nature of substance abuse. Sabi nga ni Prof. Francis, sabi niya, the earlier the prevention, the better. And we can't just say no. Diba? Yung sinasabi na, say no to drugs. We need to stop doing that. And we should focus instead on, we should know how to say no. We should know when to say no. And we should know how are we going to disassociate ourselves to the peer or to the person, an individual who is, or maybe in the situation that is trying to force us into getting addicted, or maybe not, that's not the word, getting into the practice of substance abuse. So yun. So dahil nga dito sa substance abusers, sa drug education and prevention, nagkaroon ng bagong field of science, which is yung prevention science. So this is an emerging field which is focused on using different strategies to reduce risk factors and enhance yung protective factors ng mga taong vulnerable into parang yung madaling mabuyo, 'di ba, na mag-drugs. So itong etiology model na ito is more close this time, and it's personal, close sa personal relationships, and different entry points. So for example, isang vulnerable na tao, say for example estudyante, 'di ba? Sila sabi nila gateway to substance abuse yung smoking, 'di ba? Tapos susunod diyan yung marijuana, susunod diyan yung iba't ibang klase na ng drugs, 'di ba? So yung close and personal relationships, 'di ba? Yung sa family, yung sa paggamit ng family, paggamit ng school, paggamit ng work as entry points for the message, mas magiging effective siya pag naging personal. Kunwari, nagkaroon ng okay lang ba, personal ba natin matatawag yung isang malaking symposium about drugs sa schools? Parang hindi. Kasi hindi naman may open ng bata na I have problems at home, I have problems at school. That's why parang nagkaroon ng peer pressure na niyaya ako ng mga kabarkada ko sa school na mag-smoke, ganyan. So, instead, we can maybe schedule a session, a group discussion with among peers, 'di ba? On what are the effects of early childhood smoking, 'di ba, sa mga bata. Tapos sa youth, 'di ba, amongst the youth, talk about their challenges at home and how are they going to address them instead of choosing the path of smoking or drug abuse, 'di ba? So, yung mga ganung bagay. So, we need to be creative and more personal on addressing these possible entry points. So, in terms of NSTP naman, let's talk about NSTP and its connection to drug education. Sabi ni Prof. Francis, sabi niya, yung NSTP, 'di ba? It has a tremendous power towards prevention advocacy. Kasi 'di ba sabi niya, there is power in numbers. Ay marami tayong nag-NSTP. This is actually a required course. So most likely the population, since its conception, knows about NSTP, those who went through college, 'di ba? So yung tremendous power na yon, we can shape yung peer perception about the dangers of abusing these substances if we're going to open up what we learned about in drug prevention or drug education sa NSTP. So yeah, what do we need to do? Specifically, what we need to do is organize. We need to lobby for policies. We need to lobby for facilities, 'di ba? Creation of facilities. Yung mga services, gawin nating available for them. And we need to, of course, if we cannot do that, we need to at least create anti-drug youth groups, 'di ba? Na pwede nating gawin. What else? We can utilize our social media. We can post our information dissemination campaigns through FB, TikTok, 'di ba? And I think this is one of the best ways to reach and to send the message across to the youth, 'di ba? Who are most likely going to be victims and one of the vulnerable sectors in terms of drug substance abuse. So, and ito rin, isa rin to sa mga important, we need to fight the stigma. Yung negative, yung mga negative things or negative perceptions about substance abuse, di ba? We're calling them addicts. And most likely, they're people who just use drugs, di ba? They're not drug addicts. They are abusing substance. And addiction is parang it's a negative term. It's a blanket term that just worsens the situation. So instead of addressing them as such, why not basically change it into a more inclusive na term para naman malaman nila na they're changing, we are changing the perception towards drug abusers, diba? So yeah, we need to be mindful of the stigma. And sabi nga ni Prof. Francis ulit, marami siyang mga binigay na mga iba't ibang ways, 'di ba, on how to prevent and what can we do to help. So, number one, yung value-based strategies na tinatawag. Ano ba yung stand mo? 'Di ba? Sabi nga ni Catriona in terms of the question yung about the marijuana questions. Are you for marijuana? Sabi niya, no, if it's for medical use, but if it's not for medical use, 'di ba? Sabi niya, what about alcohol and cigarette? Di ba? May paghahambing pang ganon. So sabi niya, everything is good in moderation. So, taking a stand, di ba? It tests your value system. And by targeting yung value-based strategy, by using value-based strategies such as asking people what is their stand in terms of legalization, di ba? Malalaman natin kung saan tayo magsisimula. And then number two naman yung decision stories, 'di ba? How do you handle loneliness? Kasi most likely nagsisimula yun sa problem, and problem causes some person or individual to become lonely. And when addressing those concerns, 'di ba? Key concerns of the person, of the self, nagkakaroon tayo ng mas malalim na understanding kung saan sila nagmumula. What else? Sabi niya may role plays, interviews, 'di ba? Yung service learning, and yung bus sessions na tinatawag natin. Ito yung mga parang mga focus groups or mga discussions among peers, and educating one another about what they learned, about what they know, and what they observe in their communities, di ba? And yung class research, ito, importante rin yan, data gathering, analyzing, of course. Of course, yung ads, di ba, yung advertisements, analyzing advertisements as well, and health contracts. Those are important as well. And lastly, yung wellness action plan. These are basically ways on how are we going to improve our wellness in general, health, sabihin natin physical, mental health. So those things are the things that we can do in order for us to address, 'di ba, and educate ourselves about drug prevention. And drug education is important kasi this is para rin siyang pandemic na invisible pandemic na hindi natin nakikita, 'di ba, na ang dami pa lang naapektuhan within our families, lalo na nung tukhang season of the Duterte administration. Dito sa community namin nagkaroon nga ng shootout, pinatay yung guard and such because of hinihinalang about the drugs. So we need to educate ourselves. Ano yung root cause, and then we need to educate our peers as well. So education does not stop sa'yo. Yung education, it only starts with you, and you need to do your part, magsanga-sanga na ma-address and maipakalat mo yung natutuhan mo about drug education and drug abuse or substance abuse. So yeah, that wraps up our episode number 8. Ay, number 8 na ba? Sorry, number 9. So this is episode number 9, second to the last episode, and magkita-kita tayo sa ating season finale. Well, ngayon, i-upload ko natin ngayon season finale natin. Kita-kita tayo. Again, my name is Ken, and thank you for listening to Undeterred by Ken. Bye-bye!
Your stories heard. This is Undeterred. Live! Podcast streaming on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Stories heard. This is Undeterred. Undeterred by Ken.